Joining us now is Mr. R. James Woolsey Jr., and James Woolsey, a national security and energy specialist. He was a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He headed the CIA from February 1993 until January 1995 under then-President Bill Clinton. In fact, he was Bill Clinton's first director of the CIA, and he is with us live now. He is also a Donald Trump supporter for president. Director Woolsey, good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Now, I want to get, if I can, Director Woolsey, you served very ably in the Clinton administration. Why have you come out in favor of Donald Trump for president?
Well, I've worked for four presidents. I've worked for four presidents. I was appointed to presidential appointments by President Reagan, President George H.W. Bush, President Carter, and President Clinton, two Republicans, two Democrats. I'm an old Scoop Jackson Democrat. I believe that politics ought to stop at the water's edge, and if the president wants me to work for him and help him, I do, and that's happened four times.
And Mr. Director Woolsey, you've got, as you said, a very long and distinguished track record. Many people assume that being in government for as long as you have and serving under President Clinton, many people assumed that you would be more comfortable with a Hillary Clinton administration, but you've gone the opposite way. What is it about Donald Trump that has inspired former CIA Director James Woolsey?
Well, I think he will do a lot better job of being a strong supporter of national defense. We need a very thorough refurbishing and reworking of our conventional defense forces. They've been neglected badly under the Obama administration. And we need to look to the future of defense and military affairs. We need to do a lot better job of protecting against cyber, against electromagnetic pulse. There's a Russian general named Slipchenko who says the next war will be a no-contact war. And what he means by that is no contact between bullets and people, but the contact will be between electronics and electronics. Mm-hmm. And we are, for all our expertise, we are not keeping up with some of the things we need to keep up with in these areas. I think Donald Trump is far more likely to do what's necessary in defense than Hillary Clinton is. She has so many new domestic programs going, full college tuition, all of this, and we're all nearly $20 trillion in debt now without a huge tax increase. I don't know how she thinks she can pay for even the domestic programs, much less the what's needed in defense. So I'm rather very skeptical that she would be able to do what's necessary to protect our defense forces and defense buildup that's needed.
Director Woolsey, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, I know you followed those events very closely. How would you rate the job that she did and the decisions that she made in that job?
Well, the big one, I think, was to support the Iranian nuclear deal, and that's the worst agreement the United States has ever signed that I am aware of. It is extremely one-sided in the Iranians' favor. We caved on everything one could remotely cave on in those negotiations. It's easy for them to evade inspections by just changing what they call a military facility and excluding us from inspecting any of those. They are going to have a nuclear weapon, I think, in a relatively short period of time, given how much flexibility they've been given to operate nuclear infrastructure, centrifuges, enrichment facilities, et cetera. So I think the next, and if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, other parts of the Mideast are going to follow. You're going to see Turkey and Iraq and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and the next time you have a crisis in the Middle East, instead of there being one nuclear power, Israel sitting very quietly off to the side and not saying or anything, you could well have 4 or 5 nuclear powers all feuding with one another in one way or another. It's some of these hatreds go back well over a millennium, Sunni Shia, for example. Mm-hmm. And I just think that the way she has overseen that alone is disqualifying for the presidency.
Well, Director Woolsey, in the debate Monday night, we're going to get to that in a minute, but in the debate, Hillary Clinton said, look, the deal with Iran was a great deal because it stopped them from getting nuclear weapons. She said without the deal, they were on their way to get them very quickly. How is that not accurate?
It's not accurate because they're going to get them under the agreement because the agreement has so many loopholes. And I think that the idea that this agreement is going to counter any kind of progress by the Iranians toward nukes is just fanciful. I think that there is a lot that needs to be done that was not done in terms of constraining the Iranians' buildup, and they are really free to do pretty much anything they want under this agreement, and they're getting hundreds of tens of billions, several hundred billion at one point, dollars, some of it in cash, for essentially giving to terrorists. They're the world's leading terrorist sponsor nation, and that is coming to them as a result of the money that was sequestered under the restrictions they were under, and now that the restrictions are lifted, they are having a cash cornucopia.
Right, and that money has come from us, so now they're getting the money in order to further export terrorist activities around the globe as well as invest in what could be a coming nuclear arsenal. Director Woolsey, you were, much to your chagrin, I'll say this, Monday night, during Monday night's debate, you were saying on the news that you really wanted Mr. Trump to hammer Clinton on what you called her devastating record as Secretary of State. You're thinking that's something that Trump should have done. Are you advising Mr. Trump to do that in the ensuing debate, sir?
Well, I'm part of a group that submit advice. I've really only met with him once, but I'm mainly working on press matters and answering press inquiries and the like. But I'm ready to help on whatever they need help on, and I think he's getting some good advice from some able people.
Let's get to Trump's policy on NATO and Europe. Let's get with NATO. Donald Trump calling for a relook at NATO, saying, look, this is an alliance that got set up when the Cold War was in full swing. We had the Berlin Wall. There was real concern about further Soviet aggression into Europe. That was the purpose of the NATO alliance. Now things have changed. He said it's outdated. People aren't paying their fair share. They're not paying what they're contracted to pay. And we're getting in these entangled alliances that don't really have any strategic benefit to us. If Trump becomes president and you're one of his advisors, how would you see the restructure of NATO?
Well, I think it's reasonable to go to NATO and see if we can get a more substantial contribution from them. From our fellow members, because we are carrying the lion's share of those obligations, and we always will, but there's lion's share and then there's lion's share, and our allies need to do more. This back and forth, though, about you're not doing enough, you need to do more, we're doing everything, is as old as NATO. It goes on in one way or another a lot of the time, and we are always pressing our allies to increase their percentage of their budget that goes for defense and to modernize and so forth. And it's sort of a constant theme, and Donald Trump decided to turn up the gain on the theme for a couple of discussions, but I think it's a very old scrap, and I think it will continue.
Director Woolsey, Syrian refugees, Hillary Clinton calling for 550% increase in refugees coming into the United States. Couple issues. Number one, each one that comes in estimated costs $70,000. Meantime, $20 trillion in debt. Our infrastructure's crumbling. Some people don't get that. Puts additional pressure on schools, social services, roads. People don't get that. We don't know if they can be properly vetted. Then you've got the other issue, which is we're 5,000 miles away, yet we've got 5 Gulf states, Kuwait, Dubai, UAE, Saudis, Arab Emirates. Kuwait, we liberated them with our blood. They're not taking any, and they're right up the road. How do you reconcile that to an American in a town that gets a bunch of refugees in their school, don't speak English, taking their jobs, some on welfare, when Gulf states up the street don't take any of them that we back militarily? How does this work?
Well, we have, with good reason, I think, a reputation as the world's refuge. That poem by Emma Lazarus on the base of the Statue of Liberty says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It doesn't say, "Send me your wealthy." And our country grew up as a nation of immigrants and former slaves. We very few rich Virginia planter types came over. We were all pretty poor, most of us, in one way or another. And I think it is important to help, but we got to help wisely. And we can't just let people in, especially from that part of the world, without adequate vetting and screening. And that's got to be done really, really thoroughly. It's hard for that part of the world. Passports can be forged for a few dollars, et cetera. And there are ways to scrutinize people who are applying to come into the United States far more thoroughly than we are now. I think they're probably going to be a bit expensive. But we can't just open the gates and say, "Hey, everybody come." And we also can't say, "None of you guys get to come. You're from the wrong part of the world." We gotta work this problem.
Let's get to the Syrian civil war. Could you live, being an advisor in a Trump administration, former Director Woolsey, could you live with a Syrian solution that did not remove President Assad from power?
I think it's virtually impossible to have a solution in Syria that will protect the people of Syria with Assad in power. We made the biggest mistake of many years by President Obama drawing his red line and telling Assad he will not use chemical weapons against his own people. Do not cross that red line. So he kind of made a rude gesture to us and crossed the red line and started using chemical weapons against his people. And President Obama shrugged and handed the problem over to the Russians. We lost a huge amount of credibility by that exchange and a lot of leverage by inviting the Russians to come in so solidly into the Middle East. So we've got a mess on our hands in Syria, and part of it is of our own making. But I don't really see how Assad in power is compatible with any kind of a decent life for the Syrian people. He is an incredibly brutal totalitarian dictator.
Let's get to Turkey and President Erdogan. We're having some issues with Turkey now as it related to the failed coup attempt there and what involvement we may or may not have had. In advising Donald Trump, how would you advise that he deal with President Erdogan and the Turkish situation?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand the facts, and they're a bit fuzzy now. You mentioned right there at the end of the question about what role did we have and so forth. We need to understand that. And I'm not sure we do yet. And maybe a congressional inquiry, I don't know. But that's, I think, the first thing is to get on top of the facts. Who did what to whom? What, if any, role did we have in anything, et cetera? I think that Turkey can be still a partner and a colleague in that part of the world. It is in economic difficulty now, and the uncertainties surrounding the coup are contributing to it. But we need to be able, if it's at all possible, to work with the Turks to bring stability to that part of Eurasia. I worked with them closely twice in two jobs. One is the chief negotiator for the conventional forces in Europe treaty back in 89, 90, 91. And then again, when I was at the CIA working with the Turkish intelligence folks. And they're great to work with, and they're smart, and they're loyal, and they were ideal allies. Like working with the Brits. And I really hate to see us split from them and divided and bad stuff happening. And I think it's worth a good deal of effort on our part to try to bring Turkey back into a status that we and they can live with over the long haul.
Director Woolsey, let's get to the Ukraine and Cyprus. Realistically, as the 16th CIA director in the United States, what strategic interest do we have in either Cyprus or the Ukraine? Why was the CIA involved in trying to topple that government? And why are we involved
topple
in
the government in the government
Ukraine.
Where?
In Ukraine.
Why were we involved?
Why are we involved now? I mean, what strategic interest do we have right now in Cyprus or the Ukraine? In your view?
In Ukraine, I think we have an interest in keeping Russia from getting into the habit of just conquering whoever they have a disagreement with, whether it's Ukraine or Georgia or in the future, I sure hope this doesn't happen, one of the Baltic states like Estonia. The Russians are like the old farmer that Abraham Lincoln said lived next door to his family when he was a boy. The old boy used to say, I don't need much land, just what adjoins mine. And that's kind of Russia. Whether it's Ukraine or Georgia or what, they are in a position now, and I'm afraid President Obama's dealings with them and the pivot and all that has pushed them further in this direction, that they are in a mood now to believe they can pretty well do what they want and dominate as much of the Eurasian landmass as they think is appropriate. And I think we have to want to be cordial with the Russians. And Teddy Roosevelt's formulation of speaking softly and carrying a big stick is the right formula, I think, for dealing with Russia, whether you're talking about Ukraine or as an objective of their takeover or other parts of the Caucasus or Eurasia. Cyprus, I haven't followed recently. You'll have to tell me what's cooking there.
Okay, we are out of time. I really want to thank you, sir, for joining us. Former director of the CIA, James Woolsey. He was the 16th director of the CIA in U.S. history under Bill Clinton, 92, actually 93 to 95, and now a supporter of Donald Trump and a senior advisor, national security advisor to Mr. Trump. Director Woolsey, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Really enjoyed being with you. Good questions.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.